people cannot deny one thing, that Bitcoin have a scalability issue.
Given the limited block space and so on, you essentially are trying to make the most use of that.
Like Fractal is much better than Signet. Like, let me tell you why.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Fractal Podcast. I'm Spencer Yang, core contributor to Fractal. And today we're joined by Weikeng Chen, the research partner at L2 Iterative and a key contributor to the Bitcoin Wildlife Sanctuary project. Weikeng has been a forefront of developing stock verifications on Bitcoin and also on Fractal and Bitcoin Signet. So yeah, super honored to have you here today. And welcome to the episode 3 of the Fractal Podcast. Welcome, Weikeng. We'd love to have you give the audience here a bit of an introduction about yourself. Maybe share with us a little bit more about how did you first get involved with Bitcoin? How did you get involved with research? And just all the things that is happening in the privacy space as well.
Yeah, for sure. We have been working with Fractal. I think the stock verification in the past 2 months. I'm very excited to be here. I work in a venture capital called L2IV. I'm the research partner. We kind of get into Bitcoin down this year for a few reasons. Firstly, we saw some Bitcoin deal, and some of our portfolio company also start to look into Bitcoin. That was early of the year. You can see the time when everyone start to look at Bitcoin scalability. So I kind of get into the Bitcoin because that one of our portfolio company called Polyhedra, they are doing the bridge. They actually also work with a few of the Bitcoin layer 2 on how to bridge BTC. They work on ZKP, so they were thinking that is it practical to do ZKP bridging? They were thinking that whether or not Opcode is needed or not. And at that time they have come to us because that they are busy doing the mainnet launch. We basically look at the Bitcoin for the first time. We never really studied Bitcoin a lot. Basically at that time we have a conclusion is that if you want to be very flexible, because we find BBM have some limitation, it's not easy to have thousands of the users to put in the money and quickly get that on the other chain. That is not something BBM can do. So and we conclude that you have to wait for the Opcode. So they have been waiting for that, and in the meantime, they are more doing more multi-sig bridge, based on that. So not a lot of the people really study the Bitcoin script as much as someone, especially when that person is not just because previously, when people are using Bitcoin script, you are usually using that for multi-sig. You don't use most of the rest of the functionality, and that we kind of end up being able to explore all the potential and hit all the difficulty in the Bitcoin script, so that we kind of get a lot of the experience. And later I work with Starkware to kind of do more on the Bitcoin ZK stuff. I also work with Robin in the BBM for about 1 to 2 months. We eventually work with Starkware to build a start verifier, assuming Opcode.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Weikeng, for the intro. I saw that you come from academia, but also you had a very awesome experience as well on the venture side. I think someone like yourself is super unique to the crypto space, right, and the Bitcoin space, because not only do you understand what the challenges are on the research side, but you also are able to apply more of a capital allocation kind of perspective to things. So I guess that's a very unique kind of skill set, right? How did you get into capital allocation yourself? What was your journey in crypto and Bitcoin yourself?
So when I was in the school, I was I studied cryptography. I do a lot of the stuff related to ZK and so on. After graduation, I was kind of already not thinking about a faculty job for a few reasons. First of all, faculty salary is not high. That's one of the very clear reasons. And faculty have a lot of the work, because when I was at Berkeley, I can see how busy my professor is. I also see how busy other professor is. I kind of feel that there will be a job that is really basically you don't really have a lot of the rest days when you are being a faculty. So I kind of say that's not the life I want. Also being in the school doing academia, you might not really do a lot of the very practical stuff. You will probably need to focus a lot on publication. I feel myself have always been more like a coder, developer. So I go to the industry. Later, I basically joined the venture capital. I think it's kind of you can see actually a lot of the people doing research in the industry might end up go to the venture capital in some time. I think it's kind of more relaxing in general to be a research partner, because you think about this is that investment is not something that is you are super busy. We do have a lot of the costs, but a lot of the time is deciding whether or not to invest. It's not let me study this protocol for 7 days, I will figure out whether I should invest. Usually the process is simpler. I think it's a very different like combination. Is that like, because although I'm the research partner, a lot of the time when you do like investment decision is not usually based on like research. It have to do with a lot of the like other factors. Yeah.
That's actually really fascinating, right? And maybe like for the audience here, some of the audience may be like startup founders who are looking to build their own projects and so on. Maybe on the technical side, on the research side, is there something that you like particularly look out for when you evaluate a startup? Maybe just kind of share with the audience.
So we are looking into different direction about like blockchain industry. So here is one thing that like you always run into a situation when people want to build new narrative or build something that is based on like existing technology. So basically, some are very new, innovative, also very risky. Is that there is a possibility that this doesn't work just entirely. We have a few examples. Basically, some of the like new direction that is coming up probably recently, some of them actually have that problem. Is that this will not work for sure because the technology is not good enough to have do that application. But there are also like a lot of the projects that are actually focusing on very practical side, and actually you see good result about that. I would say Fractal can be considered as one of that. Merge mining is not a new idea, but it really worked very nicely in practice, right? Like all the volume have confirmed that. So I would say that like for startup founder just need to realize that there will be a balance of that. Is that you need a new narrative to get like, for example, venture capital, like really look for like narrative and so on. But remember that like, basically, you talk about the narrative story, but don't fool yourself. Is that you always need to be practical in like, okay, how do I get the user? How do I make the user find that this is a useful product? So I would say that for founder just need to like kind of realize like this balance, because ZK is actually an industry that have suffered from that a little bit. Is that like you have so many ZK projects all focusing on technology. It's very heavy on the narrative side, but a little bit lighter on like the practical side. Yeah.
It's awesome, Weikeng. I think today for this conversation, I'm also wearing a T-shirt, from DEFCON Bogota, and I remember a lot of conversations about ZK, a lot of conversation about Starks and Snarks and stuff at a conversation. But for the audience here, maybe we'd love for you to explain, maybe in your terms, what is a Stark verifier? What is ZK to you, and why is it important for Bitcoin?
I can start with the Bitcoin part. Is like people cannot deny one thing, that Bitcoin have a scalability issue. You have the block time is already long now. Like there isn't enough block space, even just to fake like the transaction that we are seeing like today. The fee is also high, right? So Bitcoin have a scalability problem. Bitcoin also have a functionality problem, which is kind of like what OPCat is solving. And you can see very successful result on on Fractal. Is that like Bitcoin doesn't have that. And even if you have OPCat on Bitcoin still have the scalability problem. Like you, for example, if I say that with OPCat, I can do a hash function, I can do a lot of things. Maybe I can just do that on Bitcoin. Well, no, you still have the scalability issue. The current scalability is not like enough to have for all the like basically different kinds of the computation that you want Bitcoin to handle. Like let's say I want to launch a Uniswap. Bitcoin doesn't have the capacity today to do the existing transaction, not even to mention Uniswap. And that's where you have start to need some of the technique that is when people have been building for layer 2, is that you need to reduce the amount of computation to the layer 1. And there are two techniques you can do that. You can do optimistic like rollup. There will be some way to do that. Another direction, and actually that can be combined with optimistic, is that you use like ZK. The idea is this, is that like a lot of the time for blockchain to achieve a consensus, it doesn't need to do the computation. It just need to verify the computation. And human realize one thing, that like computation and verification do not have to be the same. You can have some computation where verifying that is like very efficient. And we already have that from probably very early on. Like for example, is that like RSA problem. If you know like the two prime factor of a big number, then you can confirm that that actually create a big number. But it's very difficult to factor a big number, right? And that like in the more recent world, we start to find that okay, actually we have like what we call succinct verification for probably all the computation problem. Like basically that everything that is very difficult to compute, you can actually verify that in an amount of the time that probably have nothing to do with the actual computation being done. That's what ZK is used for. It's like this, is that ZK is not just a narrative, because that like it is providing a very useful tool. What ZK represents is basically that like computation and verification are not the same. And verification can be much faster than computation. And this actually fit blockchain very well, because that in blockchain, we want to achieve like consensus. And consensus doesn't need to do the computation.
Yeah, that's a really good like expression about computation and verification. They're not equal. And also like in some ways, I think your focus is really on the verification part, right? Of the projects that you're doing. So I think in terms of verification, you've now tested the stock verifiers on both Bitcoin Signet and also for Fractal Mainnet. What are some of your like learnings from that process? Like in terms of also like deploying it, the build process and everything else. Is there anything that you want to share about that?
I actually want to say is that Fractal is much better than Signet. Like, let me tell you why. Like, Signet, we first do all the like testing on Signet. Well, for the simple reason, Fractal come, I think 1 or 2 months before like mainnet launch after we do that. And I think only in 2 months ago you announced that you decided, because the community voted for it, to add like Opcode, right? So when we test that on the Signet, like submitting the transaction is a very fun time, because I need to wait for like 10 minutes, 20 minutes to get the transaction to be accepted. You know that the Signet have that like situation. It's like it simulate a block time similar to the Bitcoin. And the fee, well, we don't need to pay the fee. Like we got some like Signet token from someone, I still don't know who that person is, but that person gave me like 2 Signet Bitcoin, very generous. But basically is that like the problem about Signet is that it can't give you a feeling about what would be the problem that you will see when you are doing that on Bitcoin. And that like you also start to realize that, yeah, like application will suffer a little bit from that. Fractal is a very different like experience. That like, so I think Fractal different from Bitcoin, I would say in 2 ways. First of all, you have OPCAP. So all these application, like Cat 20 is just like the beginning of that. And like another thing is that the block time is much better. Like, and also is that like arguably you have the Bitcoin security, because it's actually basically the same group of the miner doing the protocol, right? And I actually think, so miner actually would love Fractal, because think about that. If I'm a miner, I'm contributing my computation resources, right? I want to contribute them to somewhere useful. So basically that like for miner to mine on Bitcoin, well, they clearly love the block reward of the Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin cannot do something, but they actually can. So like basically Fractal can provide options that, okay, miner, you can also contribute your mining resources to something arguably more useful, right?
Yeah, I agree with you totally. I think the way that we have observed as well is that initially I think there was some questions from the mining community whether or not like what the value of Fractal is. But I think once they have accepted, I think the benefits and so on, they've seen the work of the team and whatnot. I've also seen, I think over the past couple of like weeks since the launch, that the merge mining hash rate has actually increased significantly, actually from like I think maybe like 10, 20, 30% at the beginning to now about 40 to 50% of like Bitcoin hash rate is actually merge mining Fractal, right? And I think to your point earlier, Weikeng, I think merge mining is actually quite a unique mechanism where it actually does allow the mining community to get involved in alternative sort of like implementations. And I think with like variations, right? For example, the community has voted for OPCAD to be enabled, and that gives you guys the ability to release what you're doing on Fractal, which is awesome. So yeah, super happy to see builders like yourself do that. I think one of the things that I also want to touch maybe a little bit on is, I think when I was reading the blog post that you guys wrote, at the Bitcoin Wildlife Sanctuary as well as the L2IV sort of firm, you guys also talked about how the interactions between STARKnet, I think Ethereum and Bitcoin, your vision kind of like plays out. Well, let's kind of like shed a bit of color on that. How are you thinking about this in your sense?
Yeah, so I think like, so I might be wrong in predicting what might be happening, but what I see today is that like, so Ethereum now have a little bit of the crisis, is that a lot of the application start to find that working on layer 1 have no value. They want to all move to layer 2. Like you actually kind of probably that's the natural way where things will progress, because that like Ethereum also have the plan that Ethereum should remain as the execution layer. It basically just have a lot of layer 2, and it was for the consensus. It's the key of the decentralization. But people start to realize one thing is that, okay, but if you say that Bitcoin is better, right? Like, so I can see this is that if Ethereum want to put itself like close the direction of not doing like actual work, but just do the verification, Bitcoin might be able to take over this responsibility entirely, because Bitcoin may also end up to be able to do that. And then you also have the situation with like I think STARKnet being one, you can see that STARKnet have been Ethereum layer 2. Actually, is kind of the first one to have the token listed. It's also one of the first one to get into the production. They are not like really, I would not say not very fun on Ethereum, but they have been already seeing a lot of the problem about Ethereum. Like just one example, EVM is still kind of like not paralyzed. And that like when STARKnet is building that, like they are building their own like language, Cairo, right? They are basically seeing that, okay, Cairo at the very beginning, for now, it will be a language that is a little bit more difficult for new developer to learn from, but it's very ZK friendly. You will get much faster proof generation of that. And you also have a lot of the parallelization guarantee that like EVM doesn't have. So basically is that like, I think this might be a time when people start to think about that, like, okay, we always have been using EVM. Is there actually better solution? And that like, oh, we have been working on Solidity, and that like we have always think that our application should be launched on Ethereum. And even if it's very expensive, but now I will have start to have second thoughts, like, okay, what if I do that on Bitcoin and so on? So I think this is a moment where the industry start to have a lot of changes, and especially what happened like in like Ethereum. And you can see similarly happen on Bitcoin is that people start to realize that, okay, Bitcoin doesn't have programmability, but the token is like super strong. And that like, because you can see that there's still so much like mining power backing it. And that like, even after all this halving, like this is like the token that really like stand out the test of the time, right? So, and like the volume, I did the like number is that like, if you compare that with like Ethereum is probably just half it. And like Solana is a very, very small fraction of the like total market cap of like BTC. And that like the market cap of BTC is technically kind of the real one, because all these are actual Bitcoin, right? Instead of some other chain where some of the token probably is like, oh, they are loaded by staking so that the selling pressure is lower, or maybe they are actually like controlled by foundation and so on. Like Bitcoin doesn't have like any of this problem. Bitcoin, because of the way the mining work, no foundation ever exists for that, right? And like recently, one of the reasons why people think Ethereum have a little bit of the problem is also because that Ethereum foundation seems to be spending too much, and Bitcoin doesn't have a foundation. That actually keep minor like comfort is that like basically no one is like really like using the Bitcoin money in a way that they don't want. So I think Bitcoin start to be like the real like decentralized currency. That kind of is what like driving the changes between that. And I think STARKnet is just like taking a step, like looking that like, okay, Bitcoin will be rising. And actually, I think a lot of the miner, a lot of the user, a lot of the investor, especially not like Web3 investor, Web2 investor that put money into our fund, also agree on that. Because from that experience, it's very obvious that Bitcoin is number one. And Bitcoin, like the token value really stood the time of the test. They think Bitcoin have a lot of potential. They want us to invest into Bitcoin, because that basically that all the factors have put into one conclusion is that Bitcoin will go up, right?
Yeah, it's actually really difficult, right? I think to your point of also on the investment side, what I saw also is that some of the alpha funds and some of the venture funds also struggle to outcompete against Bitcoin performance, right? And that's just unfortunate, right? But in some ways, it's actually not a bad thing because, like ultimately you're investing in smaller startups, you're creating more liquidity and value for the ecosystem, right? So you can't just measure the contributions of some of these firms and capital allocators based on returns itself, right? It's also sometimes the net value that you create for the ecosystem. So yeah, I think it's really nice that you kind of like characterized the interactions between your observations on Ethereum and also Bitcoin. I feel like that's also something that people are starting to realize, right? For the past 1 or 2 years, I think a lot of people were maybe a little bit distant from Bitcoin. But I think over the past year or so, so many people around us have now came back into building on Bitcoin. That's awesome. That's a really nice trend that I'm also observing, including ourselves, right? Yeah, and I think one of the things that you touched on earlier was around optimistic rollups and also ZK rollups and so on. We'd love to kind of like hear how you think about your projection of where this is going in the future. Do you see kind of a very healthy mix of both, or how would that work going forward when it comes to the rollup space? Yeah.
So I think I'm positive in like two of the specific solutions. So first of all, you kind of need some sort of ZK. Actually, it never hurt to add a little bit of the ZK to it. Why? Because like even optimistic proof will benefit from ZK, so that like basically that it will be much easier to do the for proof. Like a problem about optimistic rollout and foolproof have to do with the like data availability, because you need to make it easy for people to challenge. You need to keep a lot of the intermediate state, and that will be kind of grow up with the number of the computation that is being done. And although this is probably kind of tolerable on like Ethereum, it's kind of become a little bit of a problem on Bitcoin. So one way is this, I think, is that you will always have the ZK. So the problem becomes whether you want to run the ZK proof computation on chain, or you want to do a full proof of it. Like the full proof version of it would be that I post the proof, and if like, okay, like everyone please take a look at the proof. If you think it's not right, you can challenge that. And like we will probably give like the next hour, and an hour will be enough. Is that next hour, like the challenging is very easy. It's a very small amount of the computation. Anyone can do that. This will be much cheaper. So I think these two solutions will both work. One is to do the actual verification. This might be related for when you really need very high security guarantee. Another version, which I believe most application will be, it will be very affordable for most of the application, is to like assume that someone will be watching the proof. And we are actually already have that assumption in a lot of the Bitcoin application. Lightning Network have watchtower, and it's actually kind of per user. So each user need to get a watchtower to work with them, or the user itself become the watchtower. This one is easier. You only need one watchtower to watch one proof, like for the entire network, and it's much easier model. So I think it's that like most model actually have like evidence to see that like in Bitcoin they will work, and that like I think is quite natural, is that you will gradually see that like people will start to like use like optimistic ZK verifier, because it will be cheaper than doing the transaction itself. But basically, if you do any computation of Bitcoin, it might not be better than doing an optimistic ZK proof of it, as long as you assume a global watchtower, which I think is a very easy assumption to make. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Because I think in the mid of September, you guys launched and deployed a verifier, and then more recently, you also deployed the CirclePunk verifier. Is there a difference? And where's the state of the art actually trending towards these days?
Yeah, the second one is kind of the more recent one. There are a few differences in many different ways. First of all, the one that we announced earlier, it was kind of doing like ZK proof. So it's kind of the first ZK proof, but it was working on a very specific like problem is like related to Fibonacci. So it's kind of doing some computation, but it's not for general purpose like computation. The more recent one, we kind of do that over like basically what we call a CirclePunk like proof system. That was one that is like general purpose, that you can really build a layer 2 out of it. You can verify a logic of the like layer 2. That is kind of big, but how to say that? That is one how the differences. It's actually not that big, because that most of the code is actually the same. You are just that like basically like early on we do that over the easy example, because like the Circle Start library that like Starkware is building only have that example. And we kind of upgrade that into this version, because Starkware like library now have the like CirclePunk implementation, and we can move into that example, because the Circle Start also kind of started just this year. And it's actually a very good mix with like Bitcoin, because the like Circle Start have the few side that is like exactly like the Bitcoin maximal like integer like -1. So it actually fit very well with the entire Bitcoin thing. So I think it's that like I think it's kind of the natural like progress of that. But one more significant differences between these two versions of the verify is that the way we write it is very different. Like Fibonacci was a very tough job. It's that like we can't really work with the stat machine of the Bitcoin. We do have a calculator, and that can to calculate that how far is my variable on the stack. It's a lot of manual work. And it's also very difficult to debug. But the newer version of the verifier, not only that it is implementing a more general purpose like computation, it also is written like in some sort of like a DSL. So basically that will be, we actually write the prover, like the verifier mostly in Rust. The Rust will compile that into Bitcoin script. And that like we are also looking into working with like, because script also have like the DSL. I think that have been used to build a like Cat20 protocol. We are also thinking about that. That might be a lot of the integration of that. I think what occurred to us would not be unique. Like many teams will start to realize that I used to write like script in like basically write script, but actually now DSL start to progress. We probably don't need to write in script anymore. Yeah. So I think that is like the main progress about our like Start Verify. But I think it's an example about like all the like people trying to build over OPCAT. They actually also see something new about the entire Bitcoin script.
Yeah, I think you mentioned OPCAD as well, and I think to many people here, they probably already know that the OPCAD enables concatenation. But I think in your words as well, and also like in your view, is this absolutely necessary? What about other opcodes? Would that actually help? Or I read this paper on the Bitcoin pipe as well. Do you think some of those developments will also be relevant? And what's your view here on the importance, I guess, of OPCAD and also or other kind of like mechanisms?
Yeah, so we actually have studied the opcode like quite extensively. So here is one thing is that like in Bitcoin, when you don't have some opcode, there are two types of the consequences. One type of the consequence that some opcode is missing, but you can use other opcode to do that. It's going to be slower. It's just going to be slower. There are a lot of examples of that. Like for example, Merkle trade is something that you can still do without OPCAD, but it will be very slow. That's one. There are also examples and application on Bitcoin where if you don't have OPCAD, that would be provably impossible. By provably impossible is more like, okay, that I can actually give you a formal proof with this opcode. The only way you can do that, you have to rely on that. And I can quickly show that like, yeah, because there's no way to do this step, you actually have no way to do that. That is the situation happening in Bitcoin. And like that is kind of why we start to look at like OPCAD a lot, because OPCAD appears to be the bottleneck. Is that first of all, no opcode can simulate OPCAD. And like with our OPCADs, we can actually prove that, like, for example, recursive covenant is not possible. Actually, even covenant is not possible. But with OPCAD, both become possible. And one of the reasons we kind of know that like this have been kind of not possible is because that, so Bitcoin have a lot of BIP. Like people have been saying that like we need to edit this opcode, we need to edit that opcode. Usually it's for the second situation that I mentioned is that without the opcode, something is just completely impossible. Like OPCAD have fixed a lot of the problem. Is that it's a little bit like this, is that people have been trying to find solution for some missing things in like Bitcoin. People say that I need this opcode, I need that opcode. But that OPCAD is a good one that basically start to show and tell people that actually a lot of the problem can be solved with me. So that is the part that is like interesting on like OPCAD. There are other opcode we are also looking into that, but how to say that OPCAD is kind of quite unique because basically a lot of the other opcode you can always like emulate that. There are only a few things when you basically without opcode you kind of absolutely have no way to do it. So that is kind of my general feeling. But like and OPCAD actually have relationship like with a lot of the like previous proposal. Like one of the very famous one, chat template verify. That is the one that like enable covenant, but not recursive covenant. OPCAD can kind of just like substitute like check template verify complete with it. And I think even like the inventor, the proposal was written by Jeremy Rubin. He's also a supporter of OPCAD right now. Like I know he's doing a startup and that will be using OPCAD because I think he also agreed that like OPCAD actually provide good solution with like compared to CTV. It's not as efficient, but check template verify is not supposed to be done like a lot of the time in a script. So that's okay. So I think is that OPCAD is kind of, I would say really a milestone is that you put in this one opcode, it unlock a lot of the possibility, and then we can start to see more about that.
Yeah, totally. Do you see any risks? I know like previously one of the reasons why it was disabled was because there was some like possible risks and so on. But yeah, do you see any risks of enabling it, or what do you think are some of the blockers, to this particular proposal on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think what happened is this is that like first of all is that the risk that happened like many years ago, I think most of them are kind of go away. Why? Because that like so that reason why at that time the Bitcoin have to do that. At that time, there is not a lot of people maintaining it. It's not like oh a lot of people are using it, everyone can find bugs very quickly. I think Satoshi basically the background is likely not computer science but more like physics. And also it's C and C++, like it's known for all the like small problem that may be occurring. The programming tool that we have today is very different and become a very big community with a lot of developers. The thing about that is that it's kind of because of the risk of bugs, but that is a problem that programming language should be evolved to solve that, right? So I think is that like the main blocker that is basically the bug before is not really a big concern. What people might be concerning now about OPCAD is if people are also like minting a lot of the like ruining all the nodes on Bitcoin itself. I think Bitcoin will be very busy, right? So that is one thing that people are concerning. And another thing is about NEV attack. actually, I have a very good example. Let's say that like, okay, people are minting some token, and it seems that people are very excited about that. Miners say, no, let me go first. I want to front run all of you. I want to be the first one to mint. It's actually possible, right? So the NEV attack due to become not a thing because Bitcoin can only do token transfer. I think NEV is something that people start to consider, like whether or not that can be a problem on Bitcoin. But tomato, like NEV attack time always, right? So we don't have a very good way to fix like NEV attack for now. But that like even Bitcoin, I would say that if Bitcoin have NEV attack, it's just that okay, it didn't have NEV attack. Now you also have DeFi have NEV attack. Like it's just a natural result of having more application on the chain. Yeah, so I would consider that like that. So far, because like the Signet already deployed like OPCAP for like a few months already, and Fractal have OPCAP running in production, right? I think security risk related to OPCAP is kind of mostly like well understood. And scalability problem, people also previously have concern that whether or not like OPCAP will be a factor of the DDoS attack to the blockchain. I think so far most of the like studies have showed that like, well, you don't have to use OPCAP to DDoS like Bitcoin. There are more efficient way to do that. That's kind of the idea. Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah, thank you for so much for that summary. I think one of the things that you guys mentioned as well in the article was around some of the possible applications, right? You mentioned privacy payments, minor compensation distribution, order books, AMMs. We'd love to kind of hear from your perspective what excites you the most, or what do you think is absolutely needed in the Bitcoin ecosystem, or just like this application of stocks in general.
Yeah. I would say like privacy payment and minor compensation, actually both of them. Privacy payment is interesting because it's kind of the missing feature of like Bitcoin, right? And I can give an example. Like Liquid Network is like, I would say it's a layer 2. Actually, Liquid Network I can say it's a layer 2. They quickly added like the privacy payment feature. I think that's also the main thing that is different from like Bitcoin is that you have the privacy payment. I think it's a feature that could just be useful because that like, I think Bitcoin tried to have anonymity by, for example, locating the address, like still the Bitcoin wallet did that. But we know that like, yeah, it's no longer very useful. Data analysis is like, people are doing that very advanced right now. So I think it's a moment of the time where we start to say whether we need like stronger privacy protection. And this actually can reduce a lot of the security risks like as well. Like for example, I think there are a lot of the hackers that want to target at those like Bitcoin Bitwell. Think about that. If I see a wallet, it have like, okay, 1 million Bitcoin of it. Wow, that like I can think that like the hacker will try very hard to find who own the address and try to compromise that, even physically. Like maybe just that. Okay, I got his home address. I want to get in. I want to steal the hard wallet. Totally possible. So what happens is that if you have privacy, it actually provides safety to like Bitcoin holder as well. Is that okay? Nobody actually know how much money that I have. I can live a very simple, easy life, right? So that is something that just think about that Bitcoin as a financial product. Is that this actually provide you the level of the security similar to a bank. Like a will is rich, it doesn't need to really hide that because it's already hidden. So that's one application that I think will be useful for Bitcoin for massive adoption and really actually provide a baseline safety like protection for a lot of the like Bitcoin owner. Another one that is like related is actually minor compensation. I actually still am not fully sure about that. The part is like this: that if you look at the Bitcoin transaction, if you look at like the block, there are a lot of transactions that is about like consolidation. Usually what we call consolidation is because the mempool, like the website thinks that this is a consolidation transaction because you have 200 input. And sometimes you have like, basically you have a lot of input and then all like merge into one single address. I always have the question is that, okay, why is that happening? That why are we having so many consolidation? And they actually take out quite a lot of the like block space. Is that you can think about that. The blockchain have been doing a lot of the work in just merging like individual UTXO together. I'm still not fully sure. I try to kind of look up where are these like transactions come from. What is the reason why the transaction initially was like split? Some of them seems to have to do with like exchange like wallet. Is that people make deposit and that they need to merge that together. And also not sure whether minor compensation is also a factor where that like minor actually have a lot of smaller UTXO. So I would say that minor compensation or more generally a way to kind of reduce the need to consolidation on the Bitcoin layer 1 would be useful, because it does take up like quite a lot of the like block space. Like Ruin and Ordinal shouldn't be the only one to be blamed. Is that compared to like consolidation, they're actually a smaller one.
Yeah, I think recently OKX, I think one of the exchanges was doing some like consolidation and stuff, and that just like spiked transaction fees, fee rates by a significant amount for a couple of like blocks, right? So I think it's one of those things where I guess when some of these big entities are consolidating UTXOs, it can actually lead to quite significant fluctuations of the block space.
It would be good. That would be actually a big reason for like a layer 2 is that thing about this is that for Bitcoin probably would be saying that, oh, you are feel free to do the consolidation on layer 2, like they are just boring computation, right? So I think that like at least at most like 5 years, we should have better solution to handle like the consolidation part. Actually, TAC20 solved the problem. TAC20 doesn't cause the consolidation issue at all.
Speak more about it. How would you characterize that?
So think about this. TAC20 can build a little bit more like an account model of that, right? If you are able to build like something similar to an account model, then you can kind of calmly merge like basically the token into a specific address for that. I think one of the reasons that this might be useful is because that, like, first of all, is that a lot of the time, because previously we use like different UTXO, while we think that this might bring some security, but that one doesn't really exist like today, because it's actually very easy to like analyze that. So the problem kind of coming to this is that if the security of having a lot of UTXO is not really worthwhile, then consolidation is something that doesn't lose any like privacy. If you use an account model, actually this is basically an account model, is that if you use an account model, you can reduce consolidation. You can have consolidation done at the same time when the like computation is being done. TAC20 time actually avoid that problem. So I am kind of very positive that like basically that is possible that TAC20 eventually become a more efficient like protocol for like the token. Probably not like in terms of the script side, it probably will be a little bit more expensive than doing that. But at least it significantly reduced the set of the unspent UTXO on the blockchain. Yeah, so I think that can be actually something that will be very useful for miner as well. Is that miner probably don't need a lot of storage. You find that actually there isn't a lot of the like unspent transaction on the blockchain.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight. I agree with you. Like, I think there's definitely some efficiency concerns over here, but I think the very fact that there's an account model, I think really helps to be able to solve some of the problems that we're already seeing, right? So that's awesome. For the Bitcoin Wildlife Sanctuary and also for the Stock Verifier side of things, what are some of the next milestones that you're looking forward to?
Yeah, so we will be doing a few things. Like first of all, we will continue to like basically improve like the script. We have like at least two things on the agenda. One is we have an idea to reuse like the Bitcoin proof of work in like the start verification. So in start, there is one step that requires proof of work. We find that if you use Bitcoin, it can actually be more efficient and you can reduce like the verifier cost. So we are working on that. This is actually very tricky, is that to actually implement that in a very secure way is not easy, but we can do that over Bitcoin mainnet. You can actually use Bitcoin mainnet as the like proof of work like security source. So basically that you don't have to, basically even Fractal can get the security of that file from like mainnet in some way. So like we are kind of looking into that direction. It basically reduces like the start verification overlap on the chain. Another thing that we are doing is to have just like optimize the transaction flow. We want to basically get the verified transaction to be settled like quicker. If your transaction is bigger, it's non-standard, sometimes it will have a lot of the hard time to go through the network. We try to avoid all those problems. We make transactions smaller. We make them very easy, chewable, small bytes that like miner can gradually take. And we are kind of optimizing on that. And other than that, we probably are just more on the like, I would say a little bit more like the proof size, that we want to show that you can do like proof recursion, so that you can make sure that the proof you let Bitcoin verify is always like the smallest possible proof for that. So that is some of the things that we have been working on.
It's really interesting. It's across like a couple of different spectrums, right? You have the the miner side, how do you involve the miners more, Bitcoin mining mechanism and whatnot, and you have like this pursuit of like being smaller, right? I think it's very admirable because then, given the limited block space and so on, you essentially are trying to make the most use of that, right? And I think that definitely recently there's been a bit of criticism from some parties about how the Bitcoin block space is being used, and I think your work over there definitely will contribute to that significantly. So yeah, that's really nice. Since you've been paying attention to Bitcoin for a while now, and also like more, of course, more recently, right? Even more with the work that you're doing, where do you see like the Bitcoin ecosystem going in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I would say that like first of all, if you have OPCAT, I think a lot of the things will become automated. Why? Just think about what happened with Ethereum. Like in the past, like a few years, you see that with the layer 2, Ethereum is actually in a situation that is really, really like basically all of the attention is on it. This is not what Ethereum like was like 5 years ago. 5 years ago, I think Solana that was early, but at that time we actually a lot of people are talking about Cosmos, right? Like, and there are a lot of the other chain. Maybe people will also be saying like Polkadot. Like, so I would say that like it didn't get this like status because so here is one thing is that venture capital actually is very crucial here. If people start to see that, okay, there's a lot of potential for Bitcoin, venture capital will make sure that they are the first one to have to support project to build on Bitcoin. And you gradually will start to have everything, probably everything that you have on Ethereum right now, and you will see them on Bitcoin. Like, so venture capital will kind of just make sure that everything kind of working on an automated way that like this will move forward. I think for Bitcoin itself is that like developer will need to kind of figure out some decision, but I would say the process can be quite automated. Why? Because think about this, that maybe we are thinking that, okay, can Bitcoin eventually be like EVM? Maybe we can have an EVM, right, in Bitcoin. But now you think about that is that if you eventually will have a layer 2, you will have like layer 2 verification and so on. Maybe Bitcoin itself just need to like basically just need to be useful enough to host a lot of the application. It doesn't need to do the work itself, similar to what Ethereum want to do. So I think for Bitcoin is that like with like OPCAT and probably later on Bitcoin only need to make like smaller changes, probably just to improve like the throughput and so on. Maybe 4 MB of the block space, 4 MB of the like witness like block space will be sufficient for Bitcoin in the long run. Like that is completely possible.
Yeah, that's a really interesting insight there. Of course, in a Fractal ecosystem these days, we see a very wide variety of projects building on Fractal, right? I think for a variety of reasons. Of course, you have the Bitcoin Wildlife Sanctuary, and appreciate you guys, for your contributions. But we also see a lot of projects that are doing like, for example, protocols like Runes, BRC20s, CAD20, and whatnot, marketplaces, and so on. So, any advice in general for builders in Bitcoin on Fractal or on Bitcoin itself? What should they be concerned about? What should they be thinking about? What should they, pay more attention to, in your words?
Yeah, I would say this is that like if you look at that thing about this, that Rune and like Ordinal and like BRC20 also actually come from a few people, right? A few people have been pushing this entire movement. This was actually based on a very simple idea is that we should have like FFT, which have like customized like fungible token on Bitcoin. And think about that, these are not new, right? Ethereum have a lot of that. I think at this moment, Bitcoin like applications still have a little bit that basically that they are still very different from like Ethereum. I think our imagination have been a little bit limited because think about this is that like especially you do have OPCAT, right? Rune and Ordinal, they are protocol without OPCAT. But if you have OPCAT, I think developer, especially Fractal developer, they need to realize that okay, I'm actually in a network with Opcode and already have miner that is working on it. They can start to ask following questions that what are some of the applications that would be just useful in general, and they can actually take a look at the Ethereum and see, okay, Ethereum have this, have that. We can also have that on Fractal, right? It's not like, oh, Fractal is still a Bitcoin, it's still very similar to Bitcoin. We will be doing things that like already happen on Bitcoin. People should realize that they can also do things that already happen other places in the blockchain. They can do Ethereum. They can, if they find something useful in Polkadot, they can also do that. So I think it's the time when our imagination needs to go out beyond what people have been start working on like in the past year for Bitcoin. Yeah.
I totally agree. Weikeng, I actually look forward to your blog post at some point, if you were to write it, about what you think would be possible, right? It's almost like a request for cat requests for startups, right? In your words, like we'd love to see you kind of like share and write about that.
I think
at some point.
Fractal is already doing that, right? Through like the Green Light project. Because think about this is that like we can always think about that, oh, we have Cat 20. Can we have Uniswap? Actually, this is a very simple question. We want Uniswap, right?
I know exactly what you mean. Yeah, I think there are teams. I wouldn't say if like Unisat and our partners are working on that, but definitely I do agree with you that there's this like almost like this interesting energy that I'm seeing where a lot of the founders and projects in the space are like, hey, what can we do with this, right? Granted, the bar is a little bit higher because the infrastructure, the tooling, the documentation is not as robust as what you see on Ethereum and many other ecosystems. But I think we'll get there, right? Hopefully by this time of next year, we will have a lot less questions about what can be possible. And it's more like, how do we actually optimize whatever that's already been built, right? Which is already what you are thinking about with the projects that you are doing, which is awesome.
Have an advice to like the team is that they need to realize that this is a very good timing to build things. So it's because this is that you mentioned that like the documentation and all the tooling clearly is not as advanced as like Ethereum. Ethereum is a very special situation because too many teams have been working on that. And like for example, is that like big VC fund like Paradise, they are also building that entire tool chain. And I think more VC are trying to do that. But it's a little bit more like this is that like the Ethereum is already a city, right? You have like subway, you have buses, and people are thinking about that. I want to build a Disneyland, I want to build an ocean park, something like that. These are kind of adding things to an existing very full city. But Bitcoin, like I would say that everything you do on like Fractal or later over Bitcoin can be the first one. It can be the biggest like outcome for that entire area because you don't have that much of the competition. There is still a barrier, and it's a technical, I will not say it's a technical barrier, it's a documentation engineering barrier that you just need to take time to do that. It's a good time for a lot of the founders that are already looking at Fractal, especially already familiar with Fractal, to just be the first one to do that. Because like in 1 year, when everyone know, okay, I'm familiar with the like Fractal script, I have a book, Fractal programming, and that I start to look into that. Then like the same thing will be easier to do by a lot of the other teams. Here is the thing that I think in Fractal, a lot of the projects still have like the first mover advantage. Yeah.
Agree. I think, honestly, what I've realized, having been in like the industry for a while as well, is it's actually so valuable to be first in doing something. Like I think being first has so much more like network effects, and ultimately we are in an industry of network effects, right? It's almost like like in the citadels of research which you come from, because you also see sometimes the first person to publish something will get cited everywhere, right? And then the person becomes almost like the godfather of that specific space. But it's not because of some of the downstream applications, but it's more of like what they have done by being first, right? So I totally agree with you. I think there's a bit of that sense that hopefully some of the builders in our space can benefit from, and hopefully looking forward, like maybe in the future when we look back on this moment, we're like, hey, we actually did contribute a little bit to Bitcoin. I think that's kind of what I'll be happy with.
Yeah, I think that's already happening. Think about the Cat 20. Think about let's say OPCAT will be merged. I think for OPCAT is that it's going to be merged like maybe just a little bit later. It will get merged. Bitcoin will be completely different. Just think about the DSL that like you already have a lot of people that are building. Like later on, we will be saying that, okay, well, Bitcoin have a DSL. We don't know about Opcode, right? Just similar to Ethereum, people don't know about the Opcode like on the EVM because they always have solidity. We'll also be getting used to that. Oh, Bitcoin actually have like AMM, you have Uniswap. When we are born, it already is there, right? I would say that like the technology is advancing when you don't want to go back. Is that okay? We already have all this stuff. We take that for granted. Is that we should just program in DSL, right? All that like we are not going to do BRC20. That's like not smart. We are going to do that 20, like something like that. Is that you will start to choose the newer solution and you are going to abandon the previous solution entirely. That is the time when Bitcoin is moving forward.
Yeah, I agree with you that I think ultimately we need to chase progress, right? Not progress for progress sake, but progress because it's actually fundamentally better in some specific way, right? And but at the same time, also giving users a choice, right? I think what we have also upheld on our end is making sure that with these various protocols, we try to be as neutral as possible and allow users to be able to select across. But granted, sometimes you are not able to offer the best in-class support for everyone, right? But we'll try our best. Yeah, Weikeng, any parting thoughts on your end to the audience? This has been a really awesome discussion. I really learned a lot from you on how you think about the space. But I would love to see if you have anything else you have as advice or sharing for the Fractal ecosystem.
Yeah, I think just following that is that I think Fractal, I would say it's a good playground because first of all, it's a playground with real user and all the application are because it's mainnet ready and you have the bridges and so on. This is a real, I would say it's almost like a battlefield for a lot of these like projects. I think this is actually very useful. Just think about this, that because as you mentioned that you want to be neutral, I think that is another reason to be neutral because all these like project, all these like standard, like for example, like Cat 20, this is Cat 20 like 1.0, right? Maybe like later on, like we will have Cat 20 like 2.0, and I think that this is the time when you will be backing on probably backing on a lot of the team. Each of them will be saying that like, well, I have a better idea. Okay, let's work together. We will be doing this. This is a time when Bitcoin are going to have a lot of the attention, and eventually people will be saying that, okay, we tried for 1 year. Now we think we can start to create a BIP. We want to really standardize like BRC20. Like after 1 year of the attempt, we like get everyone to agree on something. I think this is the time when it's like basically that everyone just do their own thing and that we will see what is the best. It's not a time for standardization. It's a time for people to make a lot of tries, like attempts. And like that would be, I would not say failure. It's just that like, okay, this isn't the final solution. Actually, now like us become the final solution. The final solution is a combination of us, right? Something like that.
Yeah, it's a little bit like the United States of America, right? Sometimes you just have this state sort of legislations or state kind of like, like little agendas kind of like crop up. And at some point in the future, maybe it becomes federal, maybe it becomes unified, right? But, sometimes you don't have to do that for unification's sake. But yeah, appreciate you. Again, it's a really, really good insight. Thank you again for coming on to the Fractal podcast. We hope to have you on board in the future again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.